The universe was never meant to be peaceful. It was forged in fire, cooled in vacuum, and left to drift, an endless expanse where entropy reigns and silence devours all. In this place, the rare flickers of civilization were brief, bright, and forgotten, and yet for a time the galaxy basked in the illusion of order. They called it the Galactic Concordant, a council of ancient species, old enough to forget fear, powerful enough to forget purpose. They ruled for millennia, not through strength but inertia. Peace was their religion, arbitration their weapon. The very concept of war was repulsive to them, something primitive beneath their station. Their weapons were sealed in vaults, their fleets ceremonial. They hadn't fought in 10,000 years, and they saw that as progress. And then something came, not from a known star, not from a charted sector. There were no transmissions, no declarations, no demands. Planets simply began to vanish. At first it was subtle, a missing colony here, a silent outpost there, communications blackouts, strange sensor echoes. Then came the images, dead moons carved to their cores, orbital habitats hollowed out like fruit, starliners frozen mid-flight, crew flash petrified. An entire generation of explorers, scholars, and diplomats gone without a trace. The Concordant named them the Voltari, a desperate name, born from their first survivors' garbled cries. Something about wings and silence and shapes that moved faster than light. But the Voltari never confirmed it. They never responded. They never spoke at all. They didn't occupy, they didn't enslave, they simply consumed. World after world, species after species. The Concordant tried diplomacy, then retreat, then desperate chaotic resistance. It made no difference. Their fleets disintegrated, their leaders vanished. Entire cultures were erased, not with malice, but with indifference. The kind of cold efficiency you use to swat a bug, and all across the stars a single truth spread. The age of peace was over. No race was spared. Not the Velan, whose world brains once predicted solar storms to the second. Not the Arask Dominion, who had conquered 3 arms of the galaxy before folding themselves into the Concordant like obedient pets. Not the Amorians, whose psychic choirs once resonated through nebulae with the force of a god's hymn. Each of them fell, fast. There were no heroic last stands, no mythic wars, just quiet, clinical extinction. In the end, all that remained of the Concordant were ruins. Silent, ancient bones scattered across the stars. Bones of titans, picked clean by something too alien to understand. And in that void, on the edge of the Perseus spur, barely noticed, a small, noisy species kept talking. Humanity. It was the last time the nations of Earth voted on anything. Old rivalries dissolved. Corporate fiefdoms collapsed. National borders became irrelevant overnight. From the ashes of democracy and greed and division rose something new. They called it the Emberborn Compact. Not a government, a survival pact. For the first time in human history, every mind turned in the same direction. Every hand built for the same cause. War was not declared, it was assumed. Humanity had been forged in conflict, refined in chaos. We knew how to hate, how to build, how to burn, and we knew that survival was never granted, it was taken. While the rest of the galaxy curled into itself or died begging, we did what we'd always done. We adapted. We didn't build fleets of beauty. We built ships like spears, jagged and fast. We didn't debate morality. We tested weapons on live ground. We trained in vacuum, in hell worlds, in failing orbits. And we didn't care what it cost, because we had nothing left to lose. The Voltari didn't notice. Not yet. They were still harvesting what remained of the old powers, picking apart Concordant remnants like carrion. But something shifted. In the dark between stars, a signal emerged. Not from a human transmission, but from deep within a dead system. A fragment of something older. Forgotten. A signal that would lead us to the first key. A machine buried in time. A spark. But that is another story. For now, know this, the galaxy had fallen quiet, but in that silence, we screamed. We were still arguing over planetary rights, still waging proxy wars over dwindling resources, still fighting each other in digital trenches and trade networks and social feeds. Our technology was primitive by galactic standards. We had no slipstreams, no thought craft, no singularity cores. Our reach extended to a few dusty colonies and half-finished orbital cities. To the Concordant, we were feral children playing with fire. To the Voltari, we were beneath notice. And that was their mistake. The first human world to die was Ceres Prime. It wasn't a military post. It wasn't important. Just a mining colony orbiting a dwarf planet, home to 2 billion workers, families, researchers, no weapons, no warning. The Voltari arrived in the dark, not with ships, nothing we recognized. Just a sudden change in the stars, a distortion, then silence. By the time Earth received the emergency beacon, the colony was gone. Not destroyed, gone. No debris, no atmosphere. Just a deep gravitational scar and a growing fear. In the wake of Ceres Prime's annihilation, the stars seemed to lean in, waiting to see what humanity would do. We had always been loud, radio waves, fusion bursts, digital clutter, and ancient music bleeding out from every orbit. But now, our silence was different. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of fury. The Emberborn Compact took form in under a week. A reaction, not a plan. All the old institutions collapsed under the weight of something larger. There were no more corporations, no parliaments, no nations, only tasks, only survival. Orbital refineries were converted into war factories. Civilian transports were stripped, armored, and turned into ramming craft. Every shipyard burned with triple shifts. The stars above Earth flickered as thousands of vessels launched, not elegant but lethal. They were not built to conquer. They were built to hurt. But we used them anyway. We began to understand how they moved. They didn't fold space the way the Concordant did. They slid through it, riding pressure points like predators through ocean currents. They left behind strange signatures, spatial bruises, not trails. Using this, our best minds developed what came to be called the Pale Array, a constellation of modified deep space telescopes and exotic sensors, tuned not to light but to displacement. For the first time, we could see them coming, and once we saw them, we learned how to bait them. Our colonies became traps. We would fake distress signals, leak drive signatures that mimicked isolated life. Sometimes we'd even leave a few volunteers, those who knew what would happen. Then we'd wait. When the Voltari arrived, we'd hit them with everything. Micronuke shrapnel, gravity wells, viral AIs that hijacked their systems and burned them from the inside out. Some attacks worked, most didn't. We had no strategy, no grand vision, just an imperative: bleed them. Humanity turned the asteroid belts into minefields, left false colonies rigged with fusion cores. AI-guided drones filled dead space, programmed to learn, to adapt, to kill. No rules, no ethics. This was not the warfare of our ancestors. This was something new. We called it Scorch Doctrine, and its only rule was simple: leave nothing behind. When the Voltari came again, this time to Europa Station, they expected soft resistance. Another colony to dissect, another quiet slaughter. Instead, they were met with fire. The defense array fired plasma lances cut from ancient solar collectors. Entire atmospheric processors had been converted into directed EMP bombs. The colony's core ignited on a timer, sacrificing every soul inside to cripple the attackers. 6 Voltari craft were destroyed. It was the first time they bled, the first time something resisted. And in that moment, something changed. They noticed us. No species had ever survived their gaze for long. But we didn't just survive, we retaliated. Even as our losses mounted, even as we burned through our resources and lives, we pressed forward. We began to hunt them. Scavenger fleets combed the wreckage of concordant battlefields, salvaging anything not entirely fused or dead. We learned quickly that our weapons were primitive, but they were unpredictable. Crude human explosives, when rigged to stolen concordant tech, produced volatile effects the Voltari didn't understand. Sometimes, neither did we. But every time they came, they left damaged. And every time we learned. Our tactics horrified what few concordant survivors remained. They sent warnings, transmissions heavy with sorrow and reproach. But they didn't understand. Couldn't understand. This wasn't war. This was existence. And we were willing to go further than anything else left alive. It was during one of these scavenging missions, in the ruins of a shattered concordant research ring orbiting a white dwarf star, that we found the first signal. It wasn't Voltari, it wasn't concordant either. It was older, far older, buried in the decaying memory of a quantum relay core, hidden beneath corrupted layers of ancient data, was a single phrase. They heard it too. No origin signature, no known language, just a direction. A dead system in a forgotten spiral of the Orion Arm. No active stars, no known planets, just dust and silence. We sent a stealth probe. What it found would change everything. Beneath the crust of a rogue planet, adrift, frozen solid, was a structure. Geometrically impossible. Wrapped in shielding we didn't understand and buried so deep the planet's gravity barely held together around it. The AI aboard the probe sent back fragments, glimpses of internal architecture, strange symbols, pulse readings. Then it went silent, but the last thing it sent was clear. A power signature, still active. We diverted an Emberborn fleet, a science vessel, 24 warships for escort. 3 weeks later, they arrived and made contact. They called it the Black Archive, and within it waited the Echo Engine, a machine designed not to destroy, but to remember. And in that memory, we would find the first real key to fighting the Voltari, but not without a cost, the kind only humans would dare pay. The Black Archive was never meant to be found. Buried beneath a lifeless world, surrounded by magnetic interference fields and inert defense shells, it had drifted forgotten for uncounted eons. No concordant record mentioned it. No species claimed it. Its creators were unknown, perhaps even extinct. And yet, somehow, the power still flowed within its walls. When the Emberborn fleet arrived, their first scans failed. Their second scans nearly burned out their instruments. The readings made no sense. The structure inside the planet wasn't built in three-dimensional space. It folded. Walls looped into themselves. Rooms extended into negative dimensions. Physical logic broke down inside the archive. And at its core was the engine. Suspended in a gravity-neutral chamber, the Echo Engine pulsed like a frozen heart, dead yet alive. 10 kilometers in diameter, shaped like a sphere cracked with glowing fault lines, orbiting nothing. It produced no heat, no sound, no vibration, but it sang in radiation frequencies and quantum pulses in ways that seemed to tug at the edges of consciousness itself. The last time they came, the Silence Builders, that's what we started calling the creators of the archive, had fought the Voltari once before, 1,000,000 years ago, maybe more. They too had been grand, galactic in scope, built on knowledge beyond us, and they too had fallen. But before their final death knell, they built the Echo Engine, a warning, a mirror, and perhaps a weapon. But to access it, to run it, required more than pressing a button. It needed a mind. At first, we didn't know what it was. We thought it might be a weapon or a data vault. Then came the breakthrough. One of our cognitive engineers, a neural linguist named Del Soria, began to map the pulses like language. Not code, not mathematics, memory. The Echo Engine was not a machine of war. It was a recording, an echo of something that once was. A device built to contain the past, more than a log, more than data. It was a simulation of history, built from the raw impressions of a species long lost. A playback device for a civilization's final hours. We came to understand that it captured reality as it happened, from countless perspectives, storing it like a living museum, every thought, every feeling, every breath. And more importantly, it had recorded them. The Voltari, the kind of mind that could withstand the memory of extinction, that could process 1,000 lives at once, that could see not only what happened, but feel it. We tried AI first. They broke instantly, not just errors, collapse, meltdown. One tried to delete itself mid-process. Another produced nothing but a single word, repeated over and over, drowning. Then we tried volunteers. Each participant was isolated, neurologically monitored, and linked to the engine through a heavily shielded relay. The first 5 died within minutes. Neural overload. The 6th screamed until her lungs collapsed. Of the first 10,000 applicants, only 7 survived more than an hour. And of those 7, only 1 returned coherent. Her name was Kira Vance, age 29, orbital combat pilot, twin degrees in neuroengineering and military history. Psychological profile, stable but noted for dissociative tendencies. Known for taking risks, known for surviving things others didn't. She spent 17 hours inside the Echo Engine. When she emerged, she was changed. Not physically, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Her voice came slower, her thoughts more precise. She spoke less. But when she did, people listened. What she described defied words. She spoke of a battle that spanned decades and yet took place in minutes, of beings that moved between thoughts like we move between rooms, of ships that folded not just space but meaning, of a civilization that sang to the stars and was silenced, one voice at a time. She remembered dying, over and over. She remembered the last silence builders falling into entropy, their memories etched into the walls of their cities. She remembered standing atop their final bastion as the Voltari enveloped the sky. She remembered their last message, They feared silence, so they tried to become sound. Kira emerged from the archive with knowledge no human had ever possessed: tactics, technology, patterns. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. Enough to change the tide. She was no longer just a soldier. She was the last oracle. The Emberborn Compact immediately reassigned her to high command, not as an officer, but as an asset. She didn't give orders, she gave outcomes. Battle predictions, fleet maneuvers, timelines where humanity lived one day longer. The war changed overnight. Voltari attacks were anticipated. Human strikes became more precise. We began to intercept their movements. Our losses dropped. Their casualties rose. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first time we could imagine it. And yet, Kira warned us. The Voltari weren't done. They were learning too. They had noticed her. They had begun to adapt. And in her final brief, before she returned to the engine, she said only this: "There's something deeper, beneath what they are, something older. We've only heard the echo, but the scream is coming." The Voltari adapted faster than we feared. Their movements, once erratic and chaotic, became calculated. They began avoiding traps we hadn't set yet. They struck deeper, faster, with surgical precision. They stopped harvesting whole worlds and started targeting infrastructure, relay stations, fuel lines, data cores. They were learning from us. But we had something they didn't: the Oracle. Kira Vance wasn't just relaying tactics anymore. She saw things, possibilities, patterns that weren't visible to others. She would point to a star chart, say "not there," and 3 days later, a scout ship would detect Voltari movement in that exact region. She didn't explain how. She didn't need to. Command stopped questioning her. Orders came from her quarters now, relayed directly through Emberborn FleetNet. Some grumbled, some feared her, but none disobeyed, because it worked. The Compact's first true counteroffensive began at the edge of silence, a void region where 5 concordant empires had once converged. It had long been considered cursed space, Voltari territory. No survivors had returned from within it, ever. Until us. We sent a ghost fleet, no living crew, just AI-guided wreckage, drones reprogrammed for chaos, decoy transmissions loaded with false memories. The Voltari took the bait. Then Kira launched Strike Pattern Echo Red, a maneuver based on a Silence Builder memory fragment. 16 ships staggered through phased entry, moving against a predictive flow rather than coordinates. Human navigators couldn't comprehend it, but the Voltari could, and it confused them. In the resulting chaos, we captured our first Voltari relic. It wasn't a body. They left nothing biological behind. No skin, no blood, no tissue. But their ship, it pulsed with a strange energy, something deeper than electricity, older than plasma, organic yet artificial. Every surface was smooth, seamless, like bone turned to metal. We couldn't interface with it, couldn't crack it, but we could feel it, the presence, the hum. It wasn't a machine. It was part of them. Or maybe all of them. We didn't know yet. When Kira approached it, she collapsed. Seizure, hemorrhage, 9 minutes of unconsciousness. But when she woke, she smiled. She said it had spoken to her, not in words, not even thoughts, in pressure, in shape. The Voltari weren't just machines. They weren't just invaders. They were part of something larger. A collective, a consciousness, a protocol. She couldn't explain, but she gave it a name, the Lattice, and it was waking up. What we had fought so far were just fragments. Drones, probes, fingers. The real threat, the true intelligence behind the silence, had yet to reveal itself. And now it knew her name. After that, Kira stopped sleeping. Not because she couldn't, because she refused. She remained inside the echo engine for days at a time, living multiple timelines, multiple deaths, burning through version after version of herself. Every time she emerged, more of her humanity faded. But her insight deepened. She predicted a Voltari pincer strike on the Neptune belt 4 days before it arrived. She preempted the assassination of a key Emberborn strategist by rerouting a supply ship 3 weeks in advance. She called the collapse of 2 colonies, the mutation of Voltari tactics, and the appearance of a new kind of ship, one that phased in and out of local space like it existed only when observed. The war was changing, and so were we. To fight the Lattice, we had to become more like it. Faster, colder, less human. The Emberborn Compact authorized Project Ashwak, an initiative to fuse human cognition with predictive modeling based on echo engine data. Not AI, not clones, something in between. synthetic intuition. The first Ashwalk prototypes could simulate 2 to 3 outcomes per second. By comparison, Kira processed thousands, but the machines didn't bleed, didn't break, and we could build them. The line between humanity and tool began to blur. On the outer rim, distant colonies began to report hallucinations, shadows where none should fall, static in dreams, children speaking in unfamiliar languages. When asked what it meant, Kira said only, "The veil is thinning." That's when we learned the lattice wasn't watching us through ships or drones. It was watching through time, through memory, through her. Her exposure to the echo engine, the millions of deaths she'd experienced, the timelines she'd lived, had opened a door, one we couldn't close. And behind that door, the scream was growing louder. The Emberborn Council wanted to shut the project down, destroy the engine, bury the archive. But it was too late, because the lattice had already begun to answer, and soon the stars would tremble with its voice. The lattice responded. We couldn't see it at first. It wasn't like the Voltari ships with their deadly energy beams and hulls that could withstand a nova. It wasn't even like the dark voids they left behind in their wake, where whole star systems simply blinked out of existence. It wasn't a force we could grasp, not immediately, but we could feel it. There's a phenomenon known as spatial distortion. It happens when you move too fast through gravity wells or fold space-time in ways that violate the laws of physics. You get ripples, echoes, distortions, but the lattice wasn't distorting space. It was distorting perception. At first it was minor. A pilot would look out at a distant nebula and think they saw a shadow, a small flicker at the edge of the system, but when they tried to focus, it was gone. Then the shadows moved. At the heart of the Emberborn fleet, things became strange. Officers would report feeling watched, but no one was there. Sensors started failing, picking up things that weren't there, signals without sources, frequencies that no one could decode, but which were somehow all too familiar. It wasn't until Kira Vance fell silent that we truly understood. She stopped speaking. Not for hours, not for days, for weeks. Her insights, once a constant, vanished like smoke in the wind. The command staff waited. We hoped she'd emerge from the echo engine, give us the edge we needed to press our advantage, but when she finally appeared, her eyes were empty. The Oracle had lost herself in the lattice. At first, it seemed like madness, but then we realized the truth. Kira hadn't gone insane. She had been absorbed. The lattice had taken her in. It was a living entity, a sprawling consciousness that existed between realities. It was no longer just a collection of memories, of history. It was feeding on her. Her neural pathways had become part of its vast network. And when she spoke again, it wasn't in her voice. The words were hollow. The quiet was gone. Her voice came to us in fragments, broken pieces of knowledge and warnings. It remembers. The scream will swallow everything. The stars, the life, the silence. But it wasn't Kira anymore. It was them. The lattice. The last vestige of the Voltari's true power. And they had found us. The Concordant reacted swiftly. Fleet formations were altered. Tactical retreats were ordered. But the more they tried to resist, the more the lattice infiltrated their minds. Ships in hyperspace were forced to stop, unable to continue. Soldiers lost their memories. Colonies began to fade, as if their histories were being rewritten in real time. It was like watching a universe fall apart in slow motion. Every military asset we had, the fleet, the weapons, the intelligence, became less and less effective. The lattice had learned how to manipulate time. It had learned how to erase its presence in the past and future, to alter its own actions before they even occurred. It existed outside of our understanding, and now it was too late to stop it. We had no choice but to make our move. I remember the day they came for us, the day the lattice decided humanity was no longer a curiosity, no longer a threat, just a final whisper in the void. The war hadn't been won, not by us, not by them. It had been a deadlock, a fight in the dark, and the universe was the battleground. Our last chance came from an unlikely source, an unregistered relic ship discovered in the Astromancer fields, its origins unclear, but its purpose unmistakable. It was a prototype, an ancient device, its power core a fusion of technology from before even the Silence Builders. We called it the Prism. It wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was a key, a way to interact with the Echo Engine's core, the one place where we believed we could sever the lattice's hold. The device was a force multiplier, designed to alter perception itself, to break the lattice's connection with time and space, a way to reset everything. We loaded the prism aboard the flagship, the Renegade, and made our final jump into the heart of Voltari territory, the Echo Fringe. None of us expected to survive. As we approached the black hole-like formation of the lattice, time itself warped. The view screens flickered, showing shadows of things that weren't there. The crew began losing track of moments. Sometimes it was minutes that felt like days. Other times entire hours disappeared, like they'd never existed. And then Kira's voice came again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a question. What if we are not meant to be? We didn't have an answer. The prism activated as we neared the core of the lattice. A wave of energy washed over the fleet and the stars seemed to fold, shift. Everything that had been true seemed less real, and in that moment we understood. The universe wasn't a constant, it was fluid, a tapestry woven by time, memory, and the will to endure. In the final moments, as we approached the event horizon, I saw Kira's face one last time. Her eyes were full of the universe, full of its weight, its loss, its infinite spaces, and she said nothing. She didn't need to. We crossed the threshold blind. No sensors functioned past the Echo Fringe, no star maps aligned. The galaxy vanished behind us, replaced by a darkness too thick to be space, too quiet to be real. Our instruments still functioned, technically, but they lied. Every reading contradicted the one before. One moment, our velocity showed 0. The next, we were exceeding light. Distance became meaningless. Time fractured. Crew members reported déjà vu loops, minutes repeating, thoughts echoing, memories rearranging themselves in real time. One engineer swore he watched himself die twice before returning to his workstation unharmed. Others began to forget names, then faces, then who they were entirely. The prism held. It was the only constant. When we activated it aboard the Renegade, something changed. Not in the ship, not in the space around us. In us. The prism wasn't built to alter reality. It was built to stabilize perception, to stop the lattice from rewriting the moment you existed in. It anchored consciousness, fixed it like a nail through the fabric of time. It gave us one shot, one fixed moment in a storm of shifting futures. And so, with what remained of the fleet holding formation behind us, dozens of half-functioning ships, ghost crews, autopilots clinging to corrupted orders, we dove into the center of the lattice. We didn't breach it, we became part of it. The lattice wasn't a location, it wasn't a machine, it wasn't even a being. It was remembrance. Every death ever suffered, every scream never heard, every civilization that had burned, every child who died watching the sky fall. It was all in there, layered, interwoven, a lattice of pain. We saw them, the silence builders. Their golden cities turned to ash, their fleets crumpled like dry leaves, their last leaders falling into madness, carving their final memories into crystal walls so that something, anything might remember them. And behind it all, the original spark, the first thought, not of hatred, not even of survival, of silence. The lattice had been born from a species that no longer wished to hear the universe scream, a species that, upon witnessing the chaos of life, chose to remove itself from sound, from time, from change. They built the lattice to preserve order, a perfect moment, a stillness. It began as containment, then evolved into control, and eventually into erasure. Anything that changed, any variable, any noise, any life was removed. The Voltari were just its instruments, extensions, silencing agents. And now we were in its core, a point in unspace where entropy had been suspended, where nothing aged, nothing moved, nothing grew. We had entered the heart of stillness, and we were burning. The prism flared, bright enough to blind thought, not just eyes, a pulsing singularity of perception holding us together. We launched the final protocol. We didn't know what it would do. The theorists back home had only ever guessed. The best models predicted annihilation. The worst, something far slower. But there was no other option. The Echo engine, still linked to Kira Vance through layers of memory too deep to untangle, had revealed one last truth. The lattice could not be destroyed, only rewritten. The prism's core was not a bomb. It was a reboot. A recursive conceptual override. An idea so loud it could drown out a god. We called it the scream. It had no sound, no frequency, no waveform. It was an imprint, a memory of a choice. The choice to endure, to live no matter the entropy, to keep going even when all logic said stop. to resist silence, not because of what we are, but because we are. It was the loudest thing humanity ever made, and as it spread outward, tearing across the lattice, breaking its loops and severing its grip on history, we felt ourselves unravel, not dying, changing. I remember the moment everything came apart, not with fire, with light. Blinding, full spectrum, not just visible light, but thought light. The kind that leaves echoes in your soul, the kind that makes you remember lives you never lived. We saw Kira then, not standing on the deck, not floating in the engine, but everywhere, as if her essence had been encoded into the prism, scattered through the echo like a signal always meant to be received. She didn't speak, but in that final moment, we understood her. We weren't supposed to win. We weren't supposed to survive. We were supposed to be heard. After the scream, nothing was the same. The fleet never returned. The renegade was never found. But across human space, the effects rippled. The shadows withdrew. The distortions ceased. Voltari fleets crumbled mid-flight, vanishing as if they'd never existed. Colonies lost to silence began transmitting again. Archives once corrupted began healing. The lattice, once omnipresent, was gone, or perhaps asleep. And in its place, a signal, simple, quiet, just 2 words, she screamed. The lattice was gone. At least, that's what we told ourselves. The Prism event rewrote the rules, not just of the war, but of existence. Across the Emberborn colonies, across what was left of the Concordant ruins, across the deep fringe where nothing should have survived, something shifted. The Voltari disappeared, instantly, cleanly, like a breath exhaled into vacuum. Their fleets, their machines, their shadows, they didn't die, they ceased. Even wreckage left behind in the echo fringe crumbled into dust. It was as though they had never existed. But we remembered them, and that was the first sign that something had changed. Memory itself had become unreliable. People started seeing flickers, not ghosts, not hallucinations, fragments. Across dozens of systems, survivors reported the same phenomenon, brief glimpses of events that had never happened. Entire lifetimes felt in seconds, alternate choices, dead friends, alive, whole cities never built, fleeting visions of what could have been, or perhaps what had been once. They called it the fracture light, a shimmering, momentary distortion in reality, a reminder. The prism didn't erase the lattice, it unbound it. The difference was subtle, but devastating, because the lattice hadn't been destroyed, it had been loosened, its control broken, its shape shattered, and now its pieces floated freely, across time, across space, across consciousness itself. And with its grip gone, all the alternate versions of reality it had suppressed began to bleed through. We were not alone in our timeline anymore. We were surrounded by echoes. In some places it was harmless, a memory flash, a flicker of déjà vu, but in others it was madness. Whole cities fell into recursive memory loops. Colonists trapped reliving the same day, the same argument, the same death over and over again. Orbiting stations received distress calls from their own future. One cargo freighter even returned to port twice, both times piloted by the same crew, both insisting they were the real one. Reality had cracked, and no one knew how wide the fracture went. The Emberborn Compact initiated Protocol Haze, a temporary shutdown of all Echo-related technology. The archive was sealed. The remaining Prism schematics were erased. Command feared that continued interaction would deepen the bleed, that the universe would collapse under the weight of its own overwritten memories. But not everyone agreed. Some believed the bleed was a gift, ascensionists they called themselves. A new movement, half cult, half philosophy. They believed the fracture light wasn't a malfunction. It was the next phase of evolution, that humanity had stepped beyond linear time, and that the prism had made us something more. They began experimenting illegally on themselves, splicing echo data into their neural patterns, running recursive simulations using black box algorithms derived from Kira's final sequences. Some even claimed to have spoken with her, not as a ghost, but as a construct, alive somewhere between moments. Whether any of that was true, no one could confirm. But the results were undeniable. The ascensionists began changing. Some could see things before they happened. Others vanished mid-sentence. A few, too many, died from brain collapse, their thoughts twisted into loops that fed on themselves. And then came the event on Delta 9. An ascensionist enclave triggered what they called a time bloom, a localized ripple of timeline convergence. For 3 hours, the colony existed in 4 states at once, destroyed, abandoned, thriving, and never founded, the entire population fractured. When rescue teams arrived, there was no one left to save, only echoes. We realized then that the war hadn't ended, it had evolved. The lattice had become decentralized, fragmented across 1 trillion memories. It no longer controlled, it infected. And in a cruel twist of fate, it was us who carried the fragments now. Every survivor, every fleet officer, every engineer, every historian, every voice that had touched the prism's echo, we were the new lattice work. Humanity had survived. But the price was permanence. We were no longer bound to one timeline. Our actions rippled in ways we couldn't predict. Our memories carried weight beyond neurons and chemistry. We had become narrative engines, walking constructs of potential. And somewhere deep within the shattered echo engine, a trace signature remained. Not a signal, not even data, just a shape, a presence, Kira. She hadn't been destroyed in the Prism event. She had been distributed, spread like light refracted through a crystal, pieces of her in every memory loop, every fractured timeline, every anomaly. She had become something more than Oracle, something older, something remembered, and we began to wonder, had the scream really been ours, or had it always been hers? There is no war now, no battles, no fleets, no Voltari. The stars are quiet again, but it is not peace we live in, it is aftermath. The Prism event fractured everything, not just reality, not just memory, but the story of what we are. Time no longer runs like a river, it spirals, it folds, it returns. Across the Emberborn worlds, people wake from dreams that were not theirs. They speak languages they never learned. Some recall entire lives lived in the span of a heartbeat. Marriages, children, wars, deaths. Others walk into rooms and know what has yet to happen. These are not prophecies. They are echoes, fragments of possible selves bleeding through the cracks the lattice left behind. We became more than a species. We became a chorus. And always, always her voice lingers in the background. Kira Vance, the last oracle, the voice of the scream. Her name is never spoken aloud anymore, not by those who remember her truly. Not because we fear it, but because to speak her name is to hear it again. The scream, the choice. The moment when one life said no to silence, and the universe answered. There are monuments to her, some made of steel and light, orbiting dead stars, others more subtle, code etched into the DNA of seeds, her name hidden in the folds of leaf patterns that grow in every human colony. A whisper, a reminder, and in the deepest part of known space, beyond any mapped corridor, a single signal plays on an endless loop. One life can echo forever. The signal doesn't originate from any known station. It shouldn't exist, but it does. And those who hear it say the same thing. It sounds like memory, like a feeling you forgot you had. It never repeats exactly. It changes just slightly each time, as if it's learning. We do not rebuild in the traditional sense anymore, not in the way the Concordant once did, layering civilization upon civilization in a tower of brittle pride. No, humanity now seeds the galaxy. We scatter, we branch. Some groups seek isolation, carving new worlds for themselves in untouched systems, hoping the echoes never follow. Others dive deep into the anomalies, studying the folds of time, building religions around the fracture light, calling themselves shepherds of the scream. And in between there are those who listen, not for signals, but for stories. The archive still exists, somewhere beyond reach, its vault sealed and drifting. Some say Kira lives inside it, not as a person, but as an echo caught in recursive resonance, a loop that never ends. They say if you enter it, you don't hear her voice, you hear your own, speaking from a life you didn't live, from a decision you haven't made. And the question it always asks is the same. Will you scream too? The lattice hasn't returned. But sometimes, in the silence between stars, we feel something watching. Not a threat, not a god, something waiting. The universe is vast. We once believed it was indifferent, that life had to fight for every inch of existence, clawing itself into meaning through suffering and fire. We were wrong. The universe listens. It listens with ancient ears. It records. It remembers. And sometimes, when the moment is right, it answers, with silence or with sound. We do not know what we are anymore, but we know we were heard. And in the end, that's all any life can ask for. Not to win, not to last, but to matter. So now, as new ships leave Earth's gravity, as children born after the scream ask their first questions, as forgotten stars are given names once more, we carry the truth forward, that one voice, one choice, one scream can echo forever.